The question is that the motion be agreed to. The Honourable Judith Collins.
Mr Speaker, thank you to the Greens for that round of applause for me. It's always good to be able to reach across the aisle. And I really like James Shaw. He's a lovely person. But when he starts talking about post-truth politics, I think, what the hell's he on? Just get down to what really matters. So what we have here, Mr Speaker, is a government that has been very sensible in the way in which we have managed the country's economy, that we have delivered on our promises. And when I just saw the other day that New Zealand, not only is it the 4th safest country in the world, according to the Global Peace Index, but also we now have the 4th fastest economic growth in the OECD. That is a huge round of applause we should have for New Zealand and for New Zealanders. We had 144,000 jobs just created last year. That is enormous in a country of this size. 4.5 million people, an extra 144,000 jobs just in 1 year. And the unemployment rate, it's such a good thing for the Labour Party to have actually announced a crisis in employment, because of course the unemployment rate has dropped further as a result of that, and it's now down to 4.9%. That means we have, Mr Speaker, the 2nd highest employment rate in the OECD group of developed countries. This country's economy is rocking. We have wages are now up. The average wage is now $58,400 a year. That's $12,000 more a year since 2008. More than double the rate of inflation. And the inflation rate at the moment, I think it's around about 0.something%. 0.4%. So what we have, Mr Speaker, are more people have got more money, have got more jobs, have more opportunities, they're better educated, they're doing better, and by the way, inflation remains low. We've also got interest rates. So let's look at interest rates. They're now as low as they were in the 1960s when Keith Holyoake was the Prime Minister. That's how low they have been now for the last few years. This is something which actually makes a huge difference to people, not only to buy homes, but actually for small business owners. Because I've got news for people like the Labour Party who don't understand anything about business and small business, is most people go into business in New Zealand in small businesses. And the way that they get the capital is they borrow against their homes. They extend out their mortgages, they get overdrafts. That's how they do it, Mr Speaker. And when you're paying 28%, which is certainly what we were paying, my husband and I, back in the 1980s when Labor was in government, that's very hard to make that work, and yet we did by sheer hard work. But actually today, the interest rates are at such a low rate that people can take a risk. They can start a business, they can employ people because they can take that risk. And those low interest rates are actually translating to better business, cheaper business, more jobs, more opportunities, a richer country, more people who have got a future that they can be proud of. That's right. So when you're talking about post-truth politics, let me say this to the member who resumed his seat. Let's talk about jobs, and that's what this government's all about. Jobs and jobs that work. The government's books are back in surplus. This means actually that this government does have the opportunity to talk about what can happen with that surplus, what can happen, what can be done. Unlike the opposition, we actually have to pay for the promises. And it's great to hear Mr David Cunliffe finally speaking again in the House. Isn't that lovely? I must say, it's always good to have Mr David Cunliffe, or the Honourable David Cunliffe, I should say, speaking. It always reminds everyone just how good Andrew Little is. He really is great. And I've got a lot of faith in Andrew Little. I was thinking the other day of perhaps starting a Nats for Andy campaign. But look, I think he's doing so well on his own. And I think every time this man ever declares a crisis, it's all sorted. He's got magical abilities and he's doing so well. And I see Mr Kelvin Davis wanting to pipe up and support me in that. And I think that's great. It's good for his leadership ambitions because he's also doing so well, as we saw today. 90% of people, Mr Speaker, and paid employment are in permanent jobs. Remember what happened when we brought in the ability for people to be able to have a trial period at work? The Labor Party and the Greens said everyone would get sacked. Not under this government, Mr Speaker, not under this economy, not under this country. People now have an opportunity to have a future that they can own.